Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to British English with Alexander. Today we're gonna go through another English lesson. This is Unit 33 of our journey. 33 units out of 100 is my expectation. We're talking today about reporting statements. Basically, we're talking about that clauses. Okay, so before we get started, please, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel, share the content, and give it a thumbs like if you like it. The intention, the purpose of those videos is to help English learners all over the world to improve their English, reaching fluency, reaching proficiency, all of those things. Okay, without any further ado, let's get straight into the lesson. Okay, reporting statements. We're reporting basically something that someone has said. Someone has said something to you and you want to share it with another friend of yours, with another colleague, for example. For those constructions, we use that clauses, and sometimes we don't use those sort of clauses. Okay, so let's go through the lesson. For example, this is section C where we say, when we report statements, we often use a that clause in the reported clause. For example, he said that he was enjoying his work. He said what? He said that he was enjoying his work. So this is a formal way of reporting what someone has just said. For example, I might ask that person, "How's your work?" He might say we might say, for example, he was like, "I'm enjoying my work. I'm enjoying my work." He was like, "I'm enjoying my work." Alternatively, he might say, when asked about his job, he might say something like, and he went, "I'm enjoying my work." So those are ways to reporting what somebody has said. And in that example, it is basically in a formal way of saying he said that he was enjoying his work. So you might say he was like, "I'm enjoying my work." You're just repeating the way you're making an imitation of the way he's just reported his feelings, the circumstances in relation to his work. Another example, the members of the Security Council warned that further action may be taken. The members of the Security Council warned what? That further action may be taken. So, for example, asked if you asked someone of the Security Council about that about a certain problem, that person might answer. For example, that person might say something, and reporting that, you might say he was like, the members of the Security Council warned that further action may be taken. Or you might say, asked about the problems, he went, the members of the Security Council warned that further action may be taken. Those are informal ways of reporting what somebody has said. Okay, moving on. After the more common reporting verbs, after the more common reporting verbs, such as agree, mention, notice, promise, say, and think, we often leave out that. For example, in the previous example, he said he was enjoying his work. He said he was enjoying his work. You don't have necessarily to say he said that he was enjoying his work. You might just say he said he was enjoying his work. He said he was enjoying his work. So with those verbs, we often leave out that, particularly in informal speech. However, it's not usually left out on those three circumstances. First, after less common reporting verbs, such as complain, confide, deny, grumble, speculate, warn, and after the common reporting verbs answer, argue, and reply. But don't worry about that. It's not that important. In formal writing, it's usually considered. We don't leave it out. In formal writing, it's not quite important in terms of spoken English. And also, if that clause doesn't immediately follow the verb, for example, she agreed with her parents and brothers that it would be safer to buy a car than a motorbike. So we use that because it doesn't immediately follow the verb. Like in that example where he said that that particle is after the verb. He said that and he was enjoying his work. That's okay. But in that case, it's long after, so we've got to use that. Basically, she agreed with her parents and brothers that it would be safer to buy a car than a motorbike. So if we want to report that, we might say something like, asked about what would be better in terms of buying a car or a motorbike. She was like, I agree with my parents and brothers that it would be safer to buy a car than a motorbike. Or she might also answer, for example, asked about her choices. What would be safer for you, to buy a car or to buy a car or a motorbike? And she went, I agreed with my parents and brothers that it would be safer to buy a car than a motorbike. Or even better, asked about what would be safer in terms of buying a car or a motorbike. She was like, I agreed with my parents and brothers that it would be safer to buy a car than a motorbike. Okay, moving on. This is section B. Some reporting verbs which are followed by a that clause. So we've got the verb and then the that clause. This is a that clause. Some reporting verbs which are followed by a that clause have an alternative with an object plus to infinitive. An object, I found the results, plus to infinitive. This is an alternative to the previous sentence. Although the alternatives are often rather formal, compare. I found that the results were satisfactory. I found that the results were satisfactory. You felt what? That the results were satisfactory. And alternatively, we might say, I felt the results to be satisfactory. But in that case, it's really formal. So don't worry too much about that. The previous example is more important. I felt that the results were satisfactory. I found that the results were satisfactory. Asked about the results, he was like, the results were satisfactory, satisfactory. Or asked about the results, he went, the results were satisfactory, satisfactory. We might use that pattern with the verbs, also with the verbs to acknowledge, assume, believe, consider, declare, expect, find, presume, report, think, and understand. Remember, those verbs should be used inside a context. For example, like that, I felt that the results were satisfactory. So if you want to know, if you don't know the meaning of those verbs, and if you would like to know how to use them, you should put them inside a context so you can understand it. I'm just reading it so you can learn the pronunciation. But to get more acquainted with those verbs, you should put them inside a context, creating sentences, stuff like that. Okay, moving on to section C. If we use a that clause after an active form of some verbs, we must include an object between the verb and the that clause. This object can't be a prepositional object. For example, I notified the bank that I had changed my address. I notified the bank. You notified what? I notified the bank. Okay, but what about what? That I had changed my address. Oh, okay, I got the idea. You notified the bank that you changed your address. Oh, I got the idea. Yeah. Asked about what he had changed it. He was like, I notified the bank that I had changed my address. Or asked about what he changed it. He went, I notified the bank that I had changed my address. That's okay. We use that pattern with the verbs to assure, convince, inform, persuade, reassure, remind, and tell. Okay, moving on. However, after some other verbs, an object before a that clause is not always necessary. For example, they promised me that they would come to the party. They promised you what? That they would come to the party. Asked about what they had promised. He was like, they promised me that they would come to the party. Or asked about if they what they would do. Asked about what? Asked about whether they would come to the party. She was like, they promised. They promised. Asked about what they would. Sorry. Asked about what? Asked about whether they would come to the party. They went, or they were like, they promised me that they would come to the party. Asked about whether they would come to the party. They were like, we promised that we would come to the party. We use that pattern with also with the verbs to advise, show, teach, and warn. Okay, moving on now to section D. After some verbs, we can use that clause. This is the that clause. That clause. That she was seriously ill and that he had parked across the entrance. Those are the that clauses. After some verbs, we can use that clause with or without a personal object. The personal object is this. It's before the that clause. To me, to the driver. The that clause. However, if we do include an object, we put a preposition before it. So notice the preposition before the object. To me and to the driver, to him. So the preposition to is before the object, which before that clause. After some verbs, we use it to. So, for example, she admitted to me that she was seriously ill. She admitted to me that she was seriously ill. Or you might not consider the object with the preposition just by saying she admitted she was seriously ill. Or in the second example, I pointed out to the driver that he had parked across the entrance. Or I pointed out that he had parked across the entrance. We can use that pattern with the verbs to announce, complain, confess, explain, indicate, mention, propose, recommend, report, say, and suggest. After some verbs we use with. For example, we agreed with Ella that the information should go no further. Asked about the information, they were like, the information should go no further. Also with the verbs to argue, check, disagree, and joke. After the verbs ask, demand, and require, we use of. For example, the club asks of its members that they pay their fees by the 31st of December. Asked about date payment, he or she was like, the club asks of its members that they pay their fees by the 31st of December. But we might also say the club asks that they pay their fees by the 31st of December. Another example, the company demands of its staff that they should be at work by 8:30. The company demands of its staff that they should be at work by 8:30. Asked about the time staff should be at the company, she was like, the company demands of its staff that they should be at work by 8:30. Okay, this pattern is usually used in formal contexts, considering the verb ask of and demand of. Less formally, we can use a to infinitive clause after ask and require. E.g., that means for example. It comes from Latin. The club asks its members to pay their fees by the 31st of December. However, we can use a to infinitive clause after demand. For example, the company demands its staff to. The company demands. It always is. The company demands of its staff. There's no alternative for the verb to demand. But that's not quite important to you, so don't worry about that. Most important is to know that those verbs ask, demand, and require use of. So ask of, demand of, and require of. And that brings us to the end of our lesson. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've tried my best to explain that lesson to you. Don't worry too much about grammar because it's not that difficult. Sometimes it makes us feel worried about that, but it can be interpreted in a really easy and a funny way. I hope you've enjoyed the lesson. Please subscribe to the channel to help it to grow. Share the content with your friends. I'm trying to improve my lessons so we can bring your English to the next level. I'm just breaking it down, breaking the lessons down so we can better understand it, bringing it to the next level. I really believe that it's possible to improve your English in a really effective and sophisticated way. I hope you've enjoyed it. Cheers.